Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
I got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there, and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 478. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about bazaars and lakes and sacred mountains. Break out your atlas, because today we head to Kyrgyzstan.
One more cafe. I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. With no further ado, let's talk about Kyrgyzstan. I'd like to welcome to the show Eric Anderson. Eric Anderson is a Peace Corps volunteer in Kyrgyzstan. You can read more about his travels at ericandtaylor.com. Link to that in the show notes. Eric, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
And Eric is coming to us from Kyrgyzstan, so we have a little bit of a hiss on the line, but considering that we're going all the way halfway around the world, it really sounds pretty good.
It's a needed thing for me so I can watch some American sports while I'm living all the way over here.
Well, and before we get into why I should come to Kyrgyzstan, let's talk about why you went to Kyrgyzstan.
Well, my wife and I applied to the Peace Corps a couple of years ago, and the reason we went to Kyrgyzstan is because Peace Corps said, hey, you're going to Kyrgyzstan. So the process has changed a little bit, as
Right.
our director, who you interviewed about a month ago or so, mentioned. So people can kind of choose countries now. You can also just choose to leave it up to the whim of Peace Corps to make a decision for you. But when we applied, it was before that process was in effect. So we ended up here, which is great because we love mountains and we love hiking, and Kyrgyzstan has a lot of that.
And to be honest, could you have found Kyrgyzstan on a map before they told you you were going there?
Not a chance.
So can you help the rest of us? Where is Kyrgyzstan?
Yeah, so Kyrgyzstan is in Central Asia. It's on the western edge of China and just below Kazakhstan. And then to the south is Tajikistan and the west Uzbekistan.
Okay. That probably didn't help anybody except for China. That's the one that...
Just China's a big country, but go all the way from Beijing to the western edge and you'll find the little country of Kyrgyzstan. It's a very small country. I think they usually say it's almost exactly the size of South Dakota. in the States. So it's very small and it's very, very mountainous. It's something like 70% mountains, which can make it feel like a big country when you're here because it takes a long time to get around anywhere.
And when you pitched me the show, we have already done one show on Central Asia, on all of Central Asia, quite a while back by this point. But you said you want to do a show in Kyrgyzstan because people really ought to go to Kyrgyzstan. Why?
Well, there's a few reasons for people coming here. One, if you do want to take a trip to Central Asia, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, or Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan is the easiest country to get into. It's either no visa required or free visa on arrival for something like 60 countries now. Kazakhstan recently implemented a similar policy, but we've heard of some troubles with people not actually getting that free visa when they arrived like they expected. Kyrgyzstan is very easy. You just book your ticket, show up, they stamp your passport, and you're in Central Asia. Also, the history of Kyrgyzstan is a little bit different than the other stands around Central Asia. The people were an entirely nomadic culture, and so they don't have some of the same traditions and history that you find in places like Uzbekistan, for instance. Also, it being so mountainous, there's a lot of adventure sports to do, a lot of hiking. You can go parasailing and all kinds of stuff here. So it's really, really a great place to come. Some people come just to see Kyrgyzstan, and some people just come here first as the start of a longer trip.
Okay. And what would you recommend for an itinerary to see Kyrgyzstan?
Well, like I said, it is not a big country, but it does take a while to get around. And we had talked about itinerary time, and I know you like to talk about a 1 week itinerary, but really
1 to 2 weeks.
It's impossible to come here for 1 week. So if you're here for 2 weeks, almost everybody arrives into the capital city of Bishkek. It is possible to fly into the southern large city of Osh, but most people will come to Bishkek. And most people are also coming from quite a ways away. So I'd take a couple of days first in Bishkek, just to kind of adjust to the time zone, adjust to being in Kyrgyzstan. It's not always the easiest country to get around, so it's also nice to kind of get to Bishkek, catch your breath a little bit, kind of figure out where things are before you try to brave the taxi stand or bus station.
And when you say it's not the easiest to get around?
Well, let's talk about getting around Kyrgyzstan.
Okay.
Generally, you're going to get around either in what we call a marshrutka, which is essentially a little Dodge or Mercedes Sprinter van that's been outfitted to hold a lot more people than you think would fit in it, or a taxi. Either you can book your own taxi or you can just pay for a seat in a taxi.
A collective taxi.
Yeah, and they're not difficult. The marshrukas especially are that they go from Bishkek between one of the two main bus stations, and the prices are very fixed. If you're traveling a long distance, like to another city, you will have to have a seat. They don't permit people to stand. The taxis are a little bit more difficult because you have to negotiate the price. So what I always recommend to people when they come is to check in with either the hotel they're going to stay at or the apartment that they're going to stay or the homestay if you do CBT, which we can talk about as well, and just find out how much things are supposed to cost because they'll know, and the taxi drivers will try to charge you a lot more than you'd expect at first. But if you know what the real price is, eventually they will come down and you can get on with your ride. Within Bishkek, you also have taxis or marshrukas, or you also have trolley buses, which is my preferred way to get around Bishkek. They're much less crowded. They're very, very cheap. I think with the exchange rates today, there's something like 15 cents. That's 15 US cents per ride. So very, very cheap. And there's even an app you can get for your phone, either iPhone or Android, called bus.kg. And that will show you all the bus routes around Bishkek as well as all the marshrutka routes. So that can really help you get around and kind of get used to the way things work in Kyrgyzstan before you decide to head out to Issyk-Kul or Narin or one of the other locations we'll talk about.
Okay. You mentioned CBT.
Yes. So CBT stands for Community-Based Tourism, and it's a collection of locally based tourism companies, and they offer homestays, they can arrange rides, they can arrange horse tours or stays in yurts up in the mountains. And if you just Google CBT Kyrgyzstan, their main page will pop up. And from there, you can find the listing of all the different CBTs around Kyrgyzstan. Most regions have one, and there's, I believe, 16 today. And you can contact those via email before you come to Kyrgyzstan to try to arrange for some places to stay, find out about rides around the country and that type of thing. They are only loosely a collection, so you might find it helpful to email multiple CBTs if you're looking for a ride from one part of the country to other, for example.
Got
The
it.
prices can be a little bit inconsistent, so I just check in with a couple of them before you come. But they're really great, and in a lot of parts of the country, they're going to be the only way to really find lodging. There's not hotels in some of the smaller villages, but the CBTs can arrange for homestays where you'll get some true, authentic Kyrgyz food, meet local families, and they're really used to tourists, and it's one of the best ways to see the country.
Okay. And what are we seeing in Bishkek?
So in Bishkek, it's actually a fairly modern city compared to the rest of the country.
I was getting that impression since you've got an iPhone app, and I don't know if we have one for our buses here. I felt very remiss.
Yes, and the app can be a little bit confusing at first, but just play around with it. You can figure it out. But in Bishkek, they don't have a ton of big sites to see. A couple of the ones that I would recommend. One is Osh Bazaar. It's one of the biggest bazaars in the country, but it's also a little bit notorious for pickpockets.
Sure.
So before you go to Osh Bazaar, just take the usual precautions of making sure wallets and purses are zipped up and secured and that type of thing. But in Osh Bazaar, you can see all the traditional things that bazaar would have. You can buy souvenirs. It's great people watching. There's not a ton of tourists there. It's mostly just locals doing their normal shopping.
And what is a typical souvenir that I would bring back from Kyrgyzstan?
Well, I'd say the number one souvenir would be the kalpak, which is the traditional white pointed hat you'll see males around the country wear. They're typically white and black, and they have patterns on them that mean different things. And within just a couple minutes of being in the airport, you will see what a kalpak is because people wear them everywhere. And they fold up nicely, so you can take them easily in your suitcase, and they're not that expensive. And that's definitely the number one souvenir people take from Kyrgyzstan.
And you said rather vaguely they have symbols on them that mean different things. I'm assuming they're the names of clans or something like that, rather than some of them mean
honest,
Yankee Go Home. Or
Yeah, I don't know exactly, because when I've tried to ask, people just kind of tell me some stories about how this is a sheep horn and it means such and such, but the patterns mean like different animals and that type of thing.
Okay.
But the stories, I think, are a little bit made up, perhaps, by some of the families. But they're interesting and they're nice to look at, and they're absolutely uniquely Kyrgyz. Other souvenirs that are a little bit larger but pretty popular to bring back as well are shurdoks or tushiks. And shurdoks are large area rugs that are made of felt. They're entirely handmade. They also have patterns similar to the kalpaks. And then tushiks are a little bit narrower, and they are basically thin mattresses. And in some of your homestays, or if you go stay in a yurt somewhere, there's a good chance your bed will be made up of tushiks. And those are both popular to take back as well.
okay.
Also, when you're going around Bishkek, there's another larger bazaar called Dordoy Bazaar, which I think is the largest or one of the largest bazaars in all Central Asia. And it's interesting because it's made up entirely of shipping containers. And it is huge. It's easy to get lost, but it's pretty entertaining to go walk around there for a little while. And the last site I always recommend is the State History Museum. It's only a few dollars to get in, and none of the exhibits have English on them, but the real thing to look at is the ceiling. Both the ceilings of the museum are covered entirely in a giant mural that was done during Soviet times. And so it's a little bit of Soviet propaganda at its best that you can see right there in the museum.
So lots of happy workers, I'm assuming.
Lots of happy workers. You can learn all about how the Soviets rescued the Jewish people from the Nazis and that type of stuff. Okay. There's also, my favorite image is one of an American skeleton that looks suspiciously like Ronald Reagan riding a bomb while the people below are protesting no nuclear weapons. It's very interesting, and every couple of years there's talk that they're going to paint over the ceiling. So if you do go to Kyrgyzstan, definitely check that out.
Excellent. So after Bishkek, where to?
So if you do have extra time in Bishkek, you can do day trips from there, either to Ala Archa National Park or to Isagata. Isagata, there's a marshrutka that goes from Bishkek, so it's quite easy to get there. And it's an old Soviet-style sanatorium. Not for crazy people, but for
getting out
relaxing.
and taking baths.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, and I've never fave the services they offer there, but there is also nice hiking if you would like to do that. And then Ala Archa is a national park, and it is absolutely beautiful. And there's also a lot of mountain, rock, and ice climbing up there. So if you're coming for some of the more extreme climbing, that's a great place to start. And there's not a marshrutka that goes all the way to Ala Archa, so if you're going to go there, you'll want to hire a taxi. But it's only $15 or $20 each way for a taxi.
Okay. And you mentioned the collective taxis. Is there a specific spot where it's easy to find a shared taxi?
Well, so it depends. If, for example, you're going from Bishkek to Issyk-Kul, there's the main bus station in Bishkek. It's very near Osh Bazaar, and that's where most of the taxis and marshrukas are going to leave from.
Okay.
Some locations, such as Ala Archa, there's no shared taxis that go there, so you'll need to book your own. But if you're going to any of the regions, such as Issyk-Kul or Talas or Narin or the other oblast, there will be taxis that will leave from there. But that's why I would say it's best just to contact the CBT or your hotel beforehand and let them know where you want to go and find out how much the taxi should cost and where it leaves from.
Okay.
The information is not published anywhere online, so you really just have to ask people. And once you have the information, it's not too hard to figure out. But if you don't have the information before you go, it'll be a little bit of a challenge.
And you mentioned ask people when we're outside of a hotel in Bishkek, in the capital. How likely is it that we're going to run into somebody who speaks English?
Oh, well, if you're going to one of the nicer hotels, they will have people there that speak English. Sure. Just walking around the street, you're not going to find too much English spoken. At the bus stations and stuff like that, the taxi drivers conveniently know the numbers, and they know dollars, and they know some words such as that to try to convince you to take their taxi. But you're not going to have much success having long conversations with that many people. In Bishkek, though, there are especially students who do know English, sure. And oftentimes they will be pretty eager to practice speaking English with you. So they can be great people if you run into them to learn about things to do or places to eat and that sort of thing. But what I would recommend when it comes to the taxis and getting around the country is to go through email when you're trying to book stuff through CBTs or your hotel and ask them those questions before you even leave your country when you come to visit.
Okay. Where to next?
From Bishkek, I would then go out to Issyk-Kul, and Issyk-Kul is the oblast I live in. It's named Issyk-Kul for the lake in the center of the oblast that makes up the majority of the oblast, actually. It's called Hot Lake.
And you say the oblast, that's a region?
Yeah, so an oblast is basically like a state or a province.
Okay.
Yeah, and so Issyk-Kul is the most popular oblast for tourists to visit. There's basically one road that loops all the way around the lake. And on the far western edge is Balchi, which is the city I live in. And then on the far eastern edge is Karakol, which is a very popular tourist destination. And then depending on how much time you have, you may want to just go straight to Karakol. You can catch a marshrutka from Bishkek that goes straight there. It'll take 6 or 7 hours. And then once in Karakol, the thing to do is hike. And there are great places to hike. You can go up Jediogus, which is the name of a valley just a little bit east of Karakol. And then there's also one called Altan Arashan. And Altan Arashan is very popular with tourists because they have natural hot springs you can go to. And there's also another lake that you can hike to that's a little bit strenuous. It takes most people 3 or 4 days. And that lake is called Alakol. And it's a very, very beautiful lake and a very popular place to go. When you get to Karakol, there are some hotels there you can stay. There's also a CBT you can stay at. And if you want to do some hiking, you don't have to bring everything with you. There are places you can rent backpacks and tents and trekking poles and all that type of stuff.
Oh.
One of the better organizations to do that is an organization called EcoTrek. And it's just ecotrek.kg. And from there, they can set you up with even a guide if you want to do a longer trip. You can do things such as horse trips, just 1 day on a horse, or up to 20 days if that's what you want to do.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yes. So from Karakol, there's some very easy day hikes.
Have you done any of the horse trips since we're mentioning horse trips?
I have not done the horse treks yet. I have done a lot of hiking around Karakol, but I prefer to walk than ride a horse. So
okay.
I stick to the hiking. But Karakol is another great place if you want to do some of the more extreme climbing or just get way out into the mountains. You can basically hike through valleys all the way to China. And it's just massive, beautiful mountain peaks. and it's really, really a great place to be outside. Karakol is also a great place if you want to arrange a time to go to what's called Jailo. And Jailo are the summer pastures that the Kyrgyz people take their animals. Mm-hmm. And so once the snow melts in June, they go up there, they set up their yurts and bring all their animals, and that's where they'll basically live for the summer. And a lot of them have now set up yurt camps or just single yurts where you can arrange through something like EcoTrack or CBT to go stay for a couple nights. And that's one of the real authentic Kyrgyz experiences that people come to Kyrgyzstan for, is the opportunity to sleep in a real yurt, not one of the ones you're going to see back in the States or somewhere that's for show or for glamour camping, but an authentic yurt. And it's also a great place to use as a base for more hiking and that type of thing.
Excellent.
From Karakol, I would head towards another oblast called Naren. And there is also another marshrutka from Karakol that goes straight to Naren city, the center of Naren. But I would consider hiring a taxi because you can drive along the south shore of Issyk-Kul instead of the north shore. And the south shore of the lake is it's much less developed than the north shore, and it's very, very beautiful. And you can make stops along the way if you'd like, if you have your own driver, and it's just going to be a lot more comfortable as well. Naren is the center of Kyrgyzstan. It's all mountains. It's the highest oblast, and people always say it's the most Kyrgyz, meaning that you're not going to hear Russian anymore. You're only going to hear people speaking Kyrgyz, and it has a much different feel than Bishkek or Issyk-Kul, which have a lot more tourists.
So that implies that when I'm in Bishkek, I'm still going to hear quite a lot of Russian.
Yes, so
interesting.
I should have mentioned that. Yeah, there's actually, you're going to probably hear, especially if you're coming from a Western country, they're going to assume you speak Russian. If anything, you're definitely not going to speak Kyrgyz if you're coming as a tourist. And almost everybody in Kyrgyzstan knows at least a little bit of Russian. Okay. And in places like Bishkek, people generally are fluent in Russian and maybe not even Kyrgyz.
But I was assuming a lot of the signs would be in Cyrillic.
Yes, and that's another good tip. Before you come to Kyrgyzstan, especially if you're going to spend more time around Kazakhstan as well, it's really helpful if you can learn the Cyrillic alphabet. It's not that difficult. You don't need to learn any words, right. But just being able to pronounce the alphabet, you'll actually find a surprising amount of words, especially in restaurants, that are English words that are just written in Cyrillic. Mm-hmm. So if you're really craving pizza, that sign might be a little bit confusing unless you can pronounce the Cyrillic and realize it just says pizza.
Yeah, it's going to look like pi H. I don't know what the Z would be, but yeah.
Two threes and an
A. 2 3s, yeah, exactly.
So yes, it's very helpful, and sometimes they don't do the threes. They change how they write it sometimes, but if you can pronounce Cyrillic, it'll really, really help you. So on your way into Naren, a lot of people like to go to an even higher lake than Issyk-Kul called Songkul. And Songkul, I don't know what it is in meters, but I think it's something like 10,000 feet in elevation. And you'll need to arrange a taxi to get up there. There's a CBT in a town called Kochkor, which is very near Songkul. And they can arrange for you to have a taxi up to Songkul. When you're up there, there's many yurts you can stay at. There's also a lot of horses you can ride. Sometimes there's people demonstrating how they used to hunt with golden eagles and other traditional things like that. So it's also a very beautiful place. It's definitely on a lot of people's short list when they come to Kyrgyzstan.
When you arrange a taxi to go up to someplace like Songkul, which is at least 100 miles as I'm looking at this, maybe, do they stay with you and then you go back with them, or do you call a cab in some way once you're up there?
Yeah, you'll want to arrange that with the CBT or whomever beforehand. And if you go for one night, they'll probably just stay there. Okay. If you decide you want to spend a couple nights up there, that they might come back. Then you'll have to arrange
somebody to come back and get you.
Yeah, okay. but if you've arranged it through CBT or someone else, they're pretty good about coming back when they say they will and that kind of thing.
Interesting.
And then from Songkul, you can keep heading south in Naren through Naren city. For tourists, there's not a lot developed yet in Naren city. There are some hikes and stuff like that you can do around the city. And again, the CBT or other local trekking guides can help you find those. But if you keep going south in Naren, you get to one of my favorite spots in Kyrgyzstan, which is called Tashrabat. And this is quite a way south. Past Naren, you'll go past a town called Atbashi, and you'll also have to arrange a ride through CBT or someone to get out to Tashrabat. It's quite a ways out there, and it'll have to be someone that's got a four-wheel drive vehicle. And Tashrabat is an old building. It's one of the very, very few buildings that's left over from the Silk Road days in Kyrgyzstan. Since Kyrgyzstan was occupied by nomadic people, they didn't have any permanent structures for the Silk Road other than Tashrabat. And so Tashrabat's a very interesting building. You can also go inside of it. It's, I think, $2 US to go inside. And you can see all the little rooms where people used to sleep. The Tashrabat was built as a mixture of a fort. It actually has a dungeon in it, and then it had little rooms for people to sleep in as they were passing by to do their trade. There's a legend about how difficult it is to count the rooms, and sure enough, when our group went there, everybody came up with a different number of how many rooms were inside. So I don't know what the trick is, but it seems to work. It's a little bit difficult. And around Tashrabat, there's quite a few yurt camps you can stay at. And they say in Tashrabat you can experience 4 seasons in a single day, and we definitely did that. We stayed in Tashrabat and went for a little hike, and it was started out beautiful sun, and then it turned to rain, and then pretty soon it was hail and snow. And we woke up the next morning with a couple inches of snow on the ground. And this was in early June, so it's supposed to be summertime, but it doesn't feel like it at Tashrabat all the time. And once you leave Tashrabat, the next region that is definitely worth visiting is in the south of the country. And from Narin, there's a few ways you can get there. You can hire a off-road vehicle to take you over the high mountain pass to the west of Narin, and that will take you up this very rough road down into Jalalabad and Osh. Or you can drive all the way up to Bishkek and then take the better road south from Bishkek. Or you can go to Bishkek and then fly. And that's definitely the easiest way to get down there. The plane flight's only about half an hour, and it's $15 or $20 US. So it's very quick and easy. And if you're short on time, that's definitely the best way to go. If you have a lot of time, the road from Bishkek south down to Osh is great. So it's worth it, but it'll take a couple days, and
Great,
it's
not
a lot of
meaning
time to be in a car.
flat and easy to drive, but great meaning picturesque, scenic, and very
Picturesque. Yes, all the above. So, and then once you're down into Osh, they often refer to Osh as the capital of the south. It feels very different than Bishkek. It's a very beautiful city, and the makeup of the people is very different. So whereas in Bishkek you have mostly Kyrgyz, but quite a few Russian and other expats from other Western countries there. In Osh, it's a lot more of a mix between Kyrgyz, Uzbek, and Tajik people. And so you're going to hear a lot less Russian, you'll hear more Kyrgyz, and you'll even hear some Uzbek and Tajik sometimes. So the city feels very different. It's much more religious. In the center of Osh, they have the only UNESCO World Heritage Site in the country. It's called Solomon Tol, and Solomon is named after King Solomon, and Tol just means mountain in Kyrgyz. And it's just this mountain that rises up from the very, very flat city of Osh, and you can walk up to the top of it. There's a museum built into the side of the mountain. It's a very popular tourist destination for Kyrgyz people, actually, as well. And sometimes if you walk around the mountain a little bit, you'll see women doing shaman type of stuff. Kyrgyzstan is mostly a Muslim country, but there's other little bits of witchcraft almost that's kind of seeped into some places, which is pretty fun to see. And you'll see most of that around Solomon Tol.
You mentioned it was the only UNESCO World Heritage Site. I think that was true when you went there, but apparently in 2014, as part of the Silk Road's route, the city of Suyab became a UNESCO World Heritage Site as well.
Oh, good to know. And I do know that Kyrgyzstan has several other sites that are pending. There's some petroglyphs near Kazarman. They have an epic story about Minas, their most famous hero in their history. And I know those are both pending, but nothing else yet. I think Tashrabat should be a UNESCO World Heritage Site. I think it's on the pending list as well.
Well, I found out last week or the week before that I've been to 2 more UNESCO World Heritage Sites, and I wasn't even traveling because they named 2 sites that I had been to. So yeah, you never know. That list is always changing.
Yes.
Generally
yes.
growing. There's a few that get taken off there because they don't meet the standards of preserving the site, or they get
destroyed in Syria and such. Yeah.
Exactly.
So then also, once you're down in the south of the country, you should definitely take a visit to my favorite village in all of Kyrgyzstan, which is Arslanbab. And from Osh, you can take a couple of marshrutas, one to Jalalabad city and one from there to Arslanbab. You can also take a shared seat in a taxi, or you can arrange a taxi just for yourself. And Arslanbab is about 3 or 4 hours away from Osh. And it's very interesting because it's entirely Uzbek. It's just a little bit of an enclave for Uzbek people there. And it's still technically part of Kyrgyzstan. There are some other spots within Kyrgyzstan that are actually Uzbek, part of the country of Uzbekistan, but
little
they're located.
little enclaves of Uzbekistan surrounded by Kyrgyzstan. I noticed that.
Yes.
Noticed that on the map. Interesting.
Yes, which can run into a little bit of trouble for us if we're traveling around the country because we're not permitted to go to Uzbekistan because we don't have a visa for there. But sometimes the people we're going with may have it.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. But Arslanbab is fantastic. The place to stay there is definitely with the local CBT. There's quite a few CBT homestays that are available, I believe 18 of them, and we stayed at number 12, which is fantastic. Ask for that one if you're going to go to Arslanbab.
And this is a mountain village, it looks like?
Yes, it's one of the only villages I've been to like this in Kyrgyzstan where it's actually built on the side of the mountain. Typically, the villages are at the base of the mountain, and people take their animals to the mountains from there. But
Sure.
Arslanbab itself is actually built on the side of the mountain. And it's famous for having the world's largest walnut forest. And they are beautiful. If you happen to be coming to Kyrgyzstan in September or October, which is a little later than most tourists come, but in Arslanbab the weather will be great, and that's the harvest time for the walnut forest. And the CBT can arrange for you to get a tour around the forest, and they can show you how they process them and all that type of stuff. There's also several hikes you can go do around there. You can walk through the walnut forest, and there are 2 waterfalls you can hike to. And then, of course, they also offer horse treks and that type of thing. And if you visit Kyrgyzstan in the winter, there's cross-country skiing and snowshoeing in Arslanbab.
Now, it's interesting when you mention the walnut forest, because I think the mental picture most people have, or at least I have, of Central Asia, and we talked about this in the last time we did an episode, is that Central Asia is dry and brown. And we didn't talk about Kyrgyzstan, but what is the picture here? Obviously very mountainous.
Yes.
How forested?
So in the northern parts of the country, it's not that forested. Even when you get to the mountains, It's not densely wooded. But in the south, around Osh is part of the same valley that leads into Uzbekistan. So it's very dry, very hot, not a lot of forest. But once you get towards Arslanbab, you end up going up the mountains just a little bit, and all of a sudden you are in these woods, which is the walnut forest. And it's actually the only place I've been to in Kyrgyzstan that's quite like this. So it definitely feels like woods from back in the northwest of America where I'm from.
Okay.
And so it's quite unique from the rest of the country, let alone the rest of Central Asia. The walnut forest is all divided into groups of plots of land, maybe 20 or 40 acres. I'm not sure exactly how large they are. And different families are granted access to harvest from those different plots. And then between those plots, there's little roads you can walk through. And when you hike around the area, those are the parts you can walk through. So you're walking on a dirt road surrounded by these giant trees all around. And then there's a large mountain on the north side of Arslanbab that you can see in the distance. And if you want to do a longer hike, you can hike up there as well. It's really a great place. And Uzbek food and dress and culture and all that's just a little bit different than Kyrgyz culture. So you can experience a lot of that without actually having to leave Kyrgyzstan. And as I was mentioning, CBT number 12 is great because they have a what's called a tapchan, which is basically an outdoor patio. And it overlooks all of Arslanbab Valley. And that's where you'll have your meals and everything. And it's really a nice place.
Now, that's the second time we've mentioned food, so I can't let you go past it at this point. You say that you're going to find Uzbek food here versus Kyrgyz food. What dishes would characterize each?
So Uzbek is definitely famous for their plov, which is rice cooked in oil with different types of vegetables in there, maybe carrots or peppers and garlic.
Like a biryani, or?
Yes, very, very similar to that. But we should definitely talk about food in Kyrgyzstan. So in Bishkek, you can find all types of stuff, pizza, Chinese food, and whatever else you're looking for. Kyrgyzstan really has one big national dish, which is called besh parmak. And that basically means 5 fingers in English. It's very plain noodles with a lot of kind of fatty sheep meat in it. And most Western tourists aren't going to enjoy it that much.
Okay. I was going to say that isn't the way I would express it in the brochure if I was trying to get people to go, but
No, and honestly, if you're doing homestays and that type of stuff, they know that a lot of their visitors, it's not going to be their favorite dish. But Kyrgyzstan does have some very good food. My favorite is lagman, which is a noodle soup that's got peppers and carrots and some shredded meat and other type of stuff like that in there. It's a little bit spicy. It's very good. It's actually a Dungan dish, and the Dungan people are the group that came from China, the Islamic people from China that now reside in Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan. And their food's a little bit spicier, and now Kyrgyzstan has kind of integrated it, and they've made these new dishes, which are great. Lagman, you can also get boso lagman, which is the same as a soup, but the ingredients are fried instead of put into a soup. And that's my absolute favorite dish in the country. So definitely get boso lagman whenever you can. There's another dish that's also from the Dungans called ashlan fu, and that is a cold salad. It's made with tofu and also some peppers, and it's a little bit spicy, and it's also in a broth, and it's very good. If you come in summer, you're going to see shashlik all over the place. And basically, shashlik is a meat kebab, either mutton or beef or my favorite duck. And it's usually served on a bed of shredded onions with some vinegar. And that's really great, too.
now you recommended a cold salad in a developing country, and that that tends to be a recipe for problems.
I've never had a problem from ashlan fu. So I guess carry your CPRO with you, but yeah, never had a problem from that. That actually brings me to another point, which is I was pretty surprised when I came by how hot Kyrgyzstan can be. It's this mountainous country and all that, but when you're in Bishkek or Osh in the summer, the temperatures can easily get to 100 degrees Fahrenheit or 40 degrees Celsius. So they don't have a lot of air conditioning everywhere either. So just be prepared that you may need a warm jacket if you're going to Songkul or Tashrabat, but you're definitely going to only be dressed for the heat in the summer.
And when would you recommend we come? Is summer the best time to come? Or
Summer is the best time.
Okay.
Yeah, in the winter there is some skiing and that type of stuff, but there's probably better skiing closer to you than coming to Kyrgyzstan for that. So really it's mid-June.
So unless you want to say you've skied in Kyrgyzstan for whatever points that will get you.
Right.
Okay.
Or if you happen to be in Kyrgyzstan for some other reason in winter, then come ski. It's actually pretty nice. But yeah, mid-June through mid-September is really the best time to come.
And I'm going to guess the skiing is relatively affordable, too, as far as that goes.
Yes, it is.
Assuming you're already here rather than flying halfway around the world to get there.
Yeah, the resort I go to in Karakul, it's actually pretty nice, although a little small. And I think the lift ticket, it's about $16 or $17.
Yeah.
So it's pretty inexpensive. One other thing when you come here in summertime is that's when it's kumaz season, and kumaz is the national drink of Kyrgyzstan. You've probably heard about it if you've watched shows such as, I think Andrew Zimmern tried it in Mongolia. They have it in Kazakhstan and Mongolia as well, and it's fermented mare's milk. And some people that I know claim to love it. I don't like to drink too much of it, but it's a very unique drink. So I would try a little bit of that when you're here.
Okay. And a strong drink is the other thing you're implying there.
It's mildly alcoholic, not very strong.
Oh, okay.
It's got a very unique taste. It looks a little milky, but if you think of kind of sour milk with a splash of vodka thrown in, you're kind of on the right track.
All right. Again, not necessarily how I would describe it in the tourist brochure.
It's unique.
Any other sites you wanted to mention before we get into sort of our general questions?
Well, I think that's definitely going to take you up to 2 weeks. Okay. So there's a lot of other sites you can go to, and there's pretty much any valley in Kyrgyzstan you can hike up there because there's going to be shepherds with their animals. So if you happen to be staying in a you're on the south shore of Issyk-Kul and there's a valley behind you, you can almost definitely walk up it and there'll be a path you can take and it'll probably be very pretty.
Okay. Describe to me one time since you were in country that it just seemed really familiar. Like, I feel like I haven't even left home versus one time where it was the most foreign.
A couple stories, and I guess. So the most familiar, as I mentioned, I'm from the northwest of the U.S., so we're used to hiking in forest and all that. And I would say that the most familiar time has been on a hike I recently did in Karakol, where it was just through the trees and through the forest, and there was a river going by, and there was no we were past where all the shepherds go, so there was no more cow tracks and stuff to follow, and it was just felt like a normal hike. So that was the most it's felt like home. Although what is a little bit odd now is that after I've lived here for a year, when I'm not in the country, if I'm on a trip somewhere and I'm kind of like, okay, it's time to go home, I mean back to Balakchi. So that's a little bit strange to think of, that I do think of this as my home now, but it is. And then the times it's felt the least like home, well, pretty much my daily life does not feel like my home back in the States here. But, okay, so a lot of the volunteers, we like to get together to celebrate American holidays. Mm-hmm. And so for Thanksgiving last year, we really wanted to do a traditional Thanksgiving, have a turkey, all that type of stuff. So instead of going to your local grocery store and buying a nice fat turkey all prepped and ready for cooking, we had to go to the bazaar.
Sure.
And pick a turkey out of a cage. And then we had to put it in a bag and hold it upside down, because now I know turkeys calm down when you hold them upside down. And we had to take the live turkey in the bag, take it onto a marshrutka, and head back to the apartment where we could slaughter it and cook it and all that. Taking a live turkey on public transportation, that was a little bit strange.
Okay. We've heard of the chicken bus. Apparently that day there was the turkey bus.
That was the turkey bus, yes.
You're standing in the most beautiful spot in the whole country. Where are you standing and what are you looking at?
I would say the most beautiful place I have seen was a place called Ontour Pass, which I just recently saw. And there's a hike you can do out from Karakol, way past the turnoff to Alakol that many tourists take, and just keep going up this valley called Karakol Valley. And after about 20 miles or so, so maybe a couple days, you'll get up onto a high pass, and from there you can see Karakol Peak to the right and Jagit Peak to the left. And both peaks are something like 5,200 meters, or about 16,000 feet. And you can see the massive glaciers coming down below them. And you just walk through a high alpine meadow filled with marmots. And I'd say that's the prettiest place I've been to in the country. It's pretty unbeatable.
Excellent. One warning you would give, one thing we should know before we go to Kyrgyzstan.
The biggest danger in Kyrgyzstan is pickpockets, or people who just try to take advantage of you not knowing how much something should cost.
Sure.
So normal things when you're coming to a developing country, just make sure that you can secure things and make sure you know how much things should cost and that type of stuff, and you're going to be okay.
Well, and we talk about being taken advantage of for how much things would cost. Sometimes you might end up spending $30 instead of $15 is really kind of the risk.
Right. And I tell people when they come, if you can get within 10% of what the taxi should cost, just call it a win and go ahead and take it.
Right. What's going to surprise me when I come to Kyrgyzstan? Or among the things that are going to surprise me, what's going to surprise me first?
Well, my wife's parents just came to visit us here, and I think a lot surprised them. And I forgot how much stuff surprised me when I came, now that it feels normal. One thing I think may surprise you, for example, if you do decide to take a taxi to some of these more remote places, the thing that may slow you down the most is the giant herds of animals that take up the whole road, because there's just no other path through. So, but the other thing that really surprised me, which we talked about, was the heat. In Kyrgyzstan, you're not going to find very much air conditioning. So the heat really surprised me when I just kept looking at all these pictures of mountains.
Okay. And if we're coming to see you while we're in Kyrgyzstan, what should we pack? Because you can't get it in Kyrgyzstan.
Really good Italian salami isn't possible. Goldfish crackers and good beer. There is not much good beer here.
Oh, that's unusual. It seems like every country has beer of some sort.
There is beer, but good beer is the key. The beer here that most people drink is
mostly
maybe
water.
Baltica, which comes from Russia, and it's not great. Also, there's no good wine here, or if there is, it's very expensive.
Sure.
So, but if you would like cheap Russian vodka, they have a lot of it.
One thing that makes you laugh and say only in Kyrgyzstan.
Only in Kyrgyzstan is when you're in a taxi or marshrutka and you're delayed for 5 minutes because there's several hundred sheep blocking your road. And that happens often.
I actually had that happen in New Zealand and Ireland as well. So I'm not sure we can count that as only in Kyrgyzstan. But okay. Any other thoughts of what we should know before we get to our last two questions?
One other thing I think you should try to keep an eye out for, or maybe talk to the people you will be staying with here, is to find out if a game of Kokboru is going to be going on while you're around.
Okay.
And Kokboru, basically, it's a wolf, a gray wolf is what it means, but it's a game where it's essentially polo with two teams of something like 6 to 8 men on horses on each team. And the goal is to get this carcass of a dead goat into your
I was
bowl.
wondering if that's what we were talking about. Okay.
Yes. And sometimes there's just games going on in the middle of a field that you may come across, or they may know of an organized game that's going to be happening. But if you can see that close up, it's pretty incredible.
Excellent. And that may be the answer to the next question is you really know you're in Kyrgyzstan when what?
You really know you're in Kyrgyzstan when you decide to take a chance and go off the beaten track and go for a hike someplace that no one told you was nice, but you see a valley that looks pretty. And you hike up there and you end up running into a family who's just up there with their yurt or their tent, and they invite you in for hot tea and bread. And you meet a family that speaks no English, but they're just really happy that you're there. And you hear a lot about Kyrgyz hospitality, and that's where you really experience it, is when you just kind of take a chance and you go someplace that no one told you was where to go.
Excellent. You've lived in country now for over a year. How would you describe it if you had only 3 words?
Rewarding, beautiful, and mountains.
Excellent. And Eric, where can people read more about your travels?
So my wife and I post to our blog on www.ericandtaylor.com. And by the time this episode airs, I'll have a guide to Kyrgyzstan up so you can see some of the links to the CBTs and the types of things we talked about. And I've also been posting to Instagram a lot more lately, and that's at Eric Paul Photos.
Thanks so much for coming on The Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your love for Kyrgyzstan.
Thanks a lot.
I meant to put it in a sponsor spot earlier in the episode to announce that video course that we're doing on hosting Airbnb. If you're interested in knowing how we have at least mostly paid for or completely paid for our mortgage using Airbnb and had interesting people staying with us over the last few months, then sign up for that video course and I'll let you know when it comes out, amateurtraveler.com/Airbnb. I was just too lazy today to go back and put that where I wanted to in the episode because I didn't fly until after midnight from the East Coast, so after 3 a.m. my body time, because I was back on the East Coast working with TripAdvisor again, doing some contract work on SeatGuru.com. So if you see in the next couple weeks that SeatGuru has a new look, that's what I've been working on. I sometimes get quite behind on the Amateur Traveler email. Way back in February, I got a letter from Bear that I'll put the whole thing in the show notes, but I wanted to share some of it with you on this episode. He was pitching me a show about eating your way around the world, which we do, but we just do it in parts. We talk about eating every place we go, but we haven't done one show about it. But I loved some of his descriptions. Your show on Japan discussed octopus balls. They are made by street vendors and are delicious. You keep the balls turning or they burn. A favorite dessert in Japan is something I call moldy bean balls. Beans are mashed and mixed with something similar to molasses and then rolled and put under the sink in the dark until they get a pretty thick layer of mold on them. I stayed in 4 homes during my Fulbright period in Japan. All 4 proudly served moldy bean balls with dinner. In Paraguay, people show up at the hotel room door and say, "You want anything? It's complimentary." Then they return with a huge platter of fruits, meats, and cheeses. That went on for a week. Then I was presented with this enormous bill. Turns out the complimentary part was the free delivery. My Spanish got appreciably better after that episode. Ecuador's national food is cuy. You and I know it as guinea pig. They skin them and run a stick through their mouth and out their anus so they can be roasted on a spit. The cuy look like they just stepped out of Edward Munch's The Scream. Why? Because they are killed by making a strong slap of your hands with a guinea pig's head in the middle. Every one of them dies saying, "Aye!" It's a treat for Ecuadorians, but tends to gross out the Americans. Thanks, Bear, for that email, and I'll put the whole email in the show notes over at amateurtraveler.com. With that, we'll end this episode of The Amateur Traveler. If you have questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, or Pinterest at Chris2X. And as always, Thanks so much for listening.